going to start by reading the poem, and I'm not going to say very much about it because Colleen and I are going to discuss it in a minute. The only thing I do want to say, especially in this august venue, is that I'm the least like an expert on Iran that you'll ever find. I went on holiday for 2 weeks. This is a poem about one impression of being in Iran for 2 weeks. So, Rubaiyat for the martyrs of 2 wars. Tired of the arguments, the African fishing boats sunk in the Mediterranean, refugees shot at borders, I left home and strolled through fragrant cities with Khayyam. Pavilions frescoed with love scenes to please some mullah and his consort, redbud trees, wind catchers, watercourses, Sufi songs, santur and frame drum, urgent melodies, tiled domes and alcoves formed like stalactites of shimmering mirrors, wood-framed lattice lights scattering gold and crimson on a floor, fountains under the cypress trees, warm nights. And all along the streets, on banners hung from lampposts, like an epic once begun, never to end, the faces of the boys, dark-eyed and solemn, rippled in the sun. This loved his father, helped him in the store, learned carpet styles and textures, wanted more than life, to work and let his father rest. Offended, life betrayed him to the war. This one a student, gifted engineer, a project in his mind to bring back clear mountain snow water to his desert town, now desert dust, his gift and his career. That boy too young, who lied about his age, wanting revenge, indignant with the rage of centuries of empire, battle, power, 13 forever in war's rusting cage. In every town, in boulevards, along avenues sweet with lemon trees, among bazaars and mud brick alleyways, the dead stared down, bewildered, lonely, grieving, young. I came home to my city, read the news, double-page article, a photo, views of cousins, politicians. He was killed for walking the wrong street, a child, confused. On flyovers and high streets, Lewisham, Walthamstow, Stockwell, Tottenham, Harlesden, from invisible banners, the reproachful eyes of boys murdered by other boys gazed down. He would have been a doctor. No one thought it likely for a boy from his estate, except the science teacher and his mum fingering through the textbook he'd just bought. This one a baseball player, loose-limbed, tall, a good friend, joker, party-goer. All the young girls watched him move. The quiet one he'd loved since childhood saw him flinch and fall. This one a rapper, this a loving son, this sweet and slow and innocent. Everyone a cherished baby once, another lost chance of a better future, world undone. And then they're killers, boys at the same time or later killed in turn or jailed. The line, 2 families grieving mates, the vicious law of wars, local or national. Mothers climb monuments, platforms, town hall steps to show the faces of the dead, once smiling, now downcast forever, futureless. The past draws in like night around them, can't let go. On clotted streets, the drivers curse and swerve. The dead peer down through smog. We didn't serve our lives up to our country just to make some other despot richer. We deserve your freedom as our price. The drivers stare out at the traffic, or a girl's long hair cascading from her scarf. The men who died blur and are stifled in the choking air. The front page photos of the newly stabbed get crumpled, wet, recycled. Someone's jabbed cellophane roses through the railing where someone was yelled at, circled, taunted, grabbed. The parents of the dead themselves grow old, their loss clogging their arteries. They fold the laughing toddler that their son once was tight in their arms until the clutching moulds their bodies to the perfect stoop of grief. Once in a decade, politicians speak of tragic waste of lives, then move away to limos, brandishing a handkerchief. The towers of silence roar into the sky. You have polluted earth and water. Why rot in your hatred? Let the eternal fire compassion sear it from you, purify. If all deaths are in vain, on streets, in war, if all wars serve only to muffle more women in mourning, if our young men are invisible to the world until they die and become image, harmless, if old men envy and fear them, grab their revolution and fire it in their faces, and the old oppression that they fought begins again, if small boys learn at school that they have no talent that can delight or serve us, no laughter or song will value, thought or care, no work, no home, no joyfulness. We know death is all we've bequeathed to them. Vault down from flagpoles, fences, newsstands, Darian, Michael, Masood, Ali, help us make the sweeter world that should have been your home. Awake, for morning and the bowl of light has flung the stone that puts the stars to flight. And lo, the hunter of the east has caught the Sultan's turret in a noose of light.
Thank you, Ruth. I think I feel like we all need a minute to absorb that, because that is such a powerful poem. It's not the first time I've read or heard it, and yet I've heard new things in there today. So I think that this is one of Ruth's many skills, is how many layers she's woven into this beautiful verse. Really, so thank you. And thank you, Tammy and Hercules Editions, for asking me to be involved in this project, which I think has been really a privilege for me, I must say, and a sort of an interesting way for to express the kind of expertise that I suppose that I have about the war in Iran. So probably maybe we'll start with, I think most people know that in Iran we had a revolution in 1979, but perhaps not everyone knows that that was quickly followed by an 8-year-long war with Iraq, which started in 1980 and went on until 1988, making it the longest conventional war of the last century. There's lots and lots of horrible facts and statistics that go in along with this war. It was the first time since the First World War that trench warfare was seen again in action. It was the first time since the First World War that chemical weapons were used again. It set a horrific precedent given the things that have been going on in Syria in the last while in terms of chemical weapon use against civilians. There's a whole lot to be said about that, about the response of the international community, how when these days they say that we didn't respond to this happening in Syria a few years ago, therefore actually you can take that right back to the UN's response to Iran in the 80s and perhaps why these horrific weapons are still out there being used. Anyway, all of this is in my book, which you can see at the back there if you'd like to know more. So I guess what I'd really love to know, Ruth, is how you got interested, first of all, in wanting to go to Iran at all, actually, and how it was that this is what you took away from your trip.
Wow. Well, I've been interested for a long time. Back in the 80s, I worked at Refugee Council in London. I had a number of Iranian colleagues, and that is it. I've never been able to learn geography, but I learn things through people, and so I've discovered Iran through talking to people. I found them fascinating. I found what they were saying about the country fascinating. This was still in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war, so I was hearing about what was happening to people's families and so on, but also getting a sense, the beginnings of a sense of a culture that I realised I knew nothing about. So there was this kind of idea about going to Iran that sort of hovered around for a ridiculously long period of time, until I came up to a very significant birthday, and I thought, well, with Valentine, if you're going to go, you better go while you still can. So that's what led up to it. It took a lot of planning. You may know that if you're British or American going to Iran, you have to have a minder, you have to go through a travel agent, you have to apply for a visa. So somebody unknown in Tehran has to look at this and say, Ruth Valentine, we want to even let her apply for a visa. All of that's quite complicated. You have to put your profession, so I put writer. No, don't say that, that's really dodgy. So we ended up with retired manager, which was as anodyne as I could imagine. I thought having worked at Refugee Council might not go down well. Anyway, we got two of us got a tour designed for the two of us with a wonderful woman guide minder who took us around everywhere. Yeah, so that was how it started. Why it came out as this, I don't quite know, Camille. One thing is, I'm very clear that you can't go on holiday to somewhere sensational like Iran and write anything worth saying about the architecture or Persepolis, or, it's all been done. So there is no point in even thinking about doing the, totally ignorant tourist's guide to Iran in verse. And this was it was something about the contrast between these images. I'm going to show you some. This is what you see everywhere. But everywhere. In every city, in every small town, you see these images. Classically this, hanging off lampposts. The other one was a drinking fountain. This was a wall. I think that was outside Isfahan. You get a sense of this overwhelming number of faces looking down at you. And they're everywhere. And I assume, but you can tell me more, that if you live there, you don't look at them all the time. You don't know how they become a background and how you deal with that background. But the contrast between this and the sensational, mind-blowing stuff that we were seeing and the places we were going to. And of course we asked our guide about this and we found out what they were. But that just stayed with me. And so I knew I wanted to write something about that. I tried to write something when we were there, and that didn't really work. And it was the fact then of coming back, and the poem very literally says what happened. The first newspaper when I came back, there was yet another story of a young black man stabbed by other kids in South London. And I have been obsessed with that particular story, those stories for a long time, because it seems to me that we do exactly the opposite of this. They become invisible. It's another kid who's died. It doesn't get on the front page anymore. We take it for granted somehow that 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds kill each other on the streets, and I am so horrified by that. And so when that came, that gave me the way of putting these two things together and making a poem. So in a way, I think I want to say this isn't primarily a poem about Iran. It's a poem about what happens to young men in post-industrial societies if we don't need them to mine coal or make steel, and if we don't need to send them off to war. What else do we do with them? Well, actually, we let them rot, is one version of it.
Did you feel that this kind of memorialization of these poor boys, it feels very different to what you said was happening in London, and the fact that, but do you think this is better?
But my question, Carmen, in a way it's better because it makes it real. It's not that we don't memorialise people who die in wars here. Every village and small town and suburb has a war memorial from the First World War and the Second World War. But we do it in a kind of polite British fashion with engraved names. It makes it real that you have faces. But my question was, what does it mean that these are here, still there 30 years later? Does it mean actually that everybody is still mourning? Certainly the families are still mourning, I don't doubt that. But it's complex. What does it mean to people that these are still there? And because I'm a very political person, I think the political question was, whose interest does it serve to have these there? And it reminded me of David Cameron on a bad day deciding what we really needed to do was commemorate the beginning of the First World War. You know, if you want to distract people from what's happening now, talk about previous wars, or preferably have a war straight away. So, you know, that's how Thatcher got into power for longer. So, I don't know if that's true, but I had that question in my head. I will show you one other thing, which I found not in Iran at all, but in France at Christmas. And this is my idea of the perfect war memorial. So, for anybody who doesn't read French, it reads, "Glory and honour to the brave combatants who died for France. Cursed be all wars. Passer-by, remember always." Now, I think that's what war memorials ought to say. That exactly that combination. But they don't. They celebrate the dead, apparently, but at the same time they suggest that the war was worth it in the first place. And I think that's what we need instead.
I agree, and I think what you say about the power of war and these deaths in a way as propaganda is something that can be also seen really clearly with the Iran-Iraq war, actually, because the revolution was very young. It had happened in 1979, and in September of 1980, Iraq took the chance of, Iran's kind of strategic weakness to invade, specifically, actually, the town where I was born and where we come from. So, in the first 2 years of the Iran-Iraq war, I would say that it was Iran defending itself. It was seen as very localized. People, for example, in Tehran weren't really aware of it, didn't think it really had anything to do with them. It was over in Khuzestan. It was, Khorramshahr that was invaded. It was Abadan that was besieged. Abadan is the oil town of Iran. It's where the biggest oil refinery in the world was situated. I don't know if it still is anyway, it's still the hub of the oil industry. So obviously it was a really, really key place. It's also right on the border with Iraq, and the border with Iraq has always been demarcated in the Shatt al-Arab waterway, the river that runs sort of through Abadan. So the first 2 years of the war, it was about Iran defending itself and sort of repelling the invading army, but then it went on. It went on for another 6 years. So I think that, why did it go on? And why were these boys practically mined in order to be, almost mined to be sent to the front? Literally, it's actually mined, because they used to use there was something that the regime employed called the human wave attacks, that the Iraqis found so horrific that they would run away screaming, because they would get boys, young boys, some anecdotally, some as young as 10, 7, 12, to walk across minefields, because they used to send donkeys, and after a while the animals wouldn't go anymore. So these boys would be carrying plastic keys as their keys to heaven. They would be wearing shrouds in honor of their impending martyrdom. So this is, I'm sorry, I know this is really heavy stuff, but but it is what happened, and this is the reality of what happened. That's so the memorials, this whole concept of martyrdom, which I've written about in the essay, which Ruth touches on in her poem and examines it. How was that used in order to keep this war machine going? And why was the war machine kept going after Iraq had been defeated in the sense that it had been repelled away from Khuzestan. Suddenly the Iranian army had this mission to go to Basra, to then go as far as Baghdad. A lot of Iranians weren't actually really interested in invading Iraq, but that's what suited the revolutionary regime. Why? Because perhaps without this war, particularly going on for such a long time, the revolution might not have stuck the way that it did. The revolution was a complex and complicated thing. It wasn't particularly an Islamic revolution, really, when it happened. But in order for that to become entrenched, in order for the regime to be able to take away the rights of people that they had enjoyed, for example, our women who've been enjoying the vote, the first people in the Middle East since 1964, this kind of thing, they weren't giving up their rights so easily. Something as visible as the hijab, which is what people always really remark on about Iran and the state of women. They tried to introduce that women should wear the hijab in 79. Women refused. They just refused. It was just really simple. But you see the stuff, then there was the war, then it was about, supporting your country, then, it all becomes about nationalism. Yeah. And so that was a way, I think, for the regime to entrench its own new laws on a country that felt under attack. And so the fact that this concept of martyrdom is still going on is, as Ruth says, I think it's still a justification and a sort of glorification of something that was really just a waste.
What do people feel about these? Do people comment on the fact that these faces are still there now? Does everybody just take it for granted? Our guide, when we were there, we asked her about it, and she just said, I have an enormous respect for these young men. And I can understand that. But I wonder, I'm sure there isn't a simple answer to what people feel, because there isn't one single thing that everybody feels. But
I think you touch on it in your poem, Ruth, because you talk about the girls with their hair showing under their scarves, walking under these murals, and people minding that.
Mm-hmm.
I, in my work, have spoken to several veterans who see the younger generation, because the war ended in 88. You still feel it. And even, a lot of the young kids will sort of can remember it as children or whatever, and even the new generation, anyway, their parents lived through it. So, these things don't get forgotten so easily. They do get passed down. But the younger generation are a lot more free. They have a lot more social freedoms. They want a lot more social freedoms. They love the consumer society that Iran has become. I'm sure you noticed. It's not a sort of lovely, sort of removed. It's very modern and very vibrant, and there's a lot of money flying about, and everyone wants to buy stuff. And it feels like a massive disconnect, doesn't it? It feels like a massive disconnect between these sort of Glamazonian girls who are kind of awfully tall and beautiful with their kind of redone noses and their beautiful kind of makeup and their scarves kind of hanging off here. And these images that are staring down at them. And so, of course, there is this feeling amongst some of the veterans of, what did we fight for? Where are these values that we fought for? So I know through my own work, and actually through the work of a great friend of mine, who has done a lot, particularly with victims of the chemical attacks, that there is a big feeling of futility, which in a way is inevitable.
Is the feeling of futility because the younger generation wants something more Western, or because change hasn't happened in the way people wanted?
It's an interesting question. I think one of the concepts, the massive concept behind the revolution, and therefore that drove and is still the revolutionary rhetoric that's that the regime says is about, rejecting the values of the West, which of course the younger generation don't necessarily want to do. And I think that for us, for example, when we go back to Iran, it's much more westernized than it was before the revolution in a funny way. Just because people are wearing hijab, it doesn't necessarily mean, that it's gone backwards. Tehran is unrecognizable in terms of the skyscrapers, the modern architecture, the modern everything. To me, it looks much more westernized now than it did before.
It is the split between the more Western middle class and the poor as it was before the revolution? Or... I mean, I'm assuming there's a split. It looked like a split. I'm asking you.
Yeah, well, I think there was a massive split, which is where the revolution came from.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. It seems to me that the wealthy classes are much more wealthy than they used to be.
Yeah.
And the poor are probably just as poor, if not poorer. Yeah. And the middle class is being destroyed.
Right.
Which is a sort of global trend anyway, because of the economy. Because another thing that the war did is it destroyed absolutely Iran's economy. So it's taken a lot of time to come back from that. I mean, one of the horrible facts, the resources wasted on the war exceeded what the entire third world spent on public health in a decade. Okay, so those are facts of war. Another complexity is this way that the government has of grading martyrdom. I don't know if you were aware of this.
No.
If you have a martyr in your family, you will get some preferential treatment. So you will get better access to jobs, better access to universities. There are places reserved for families of martyrs. So, of course, that makes a lot of resentment within society. It means that it sort of breeds a kind of dishonesty where people are jockeying to kind of say, listen, this person died like this or whatever.
We've got more martyrs than you have.
Right. And when I was working with the victims of the chemical attacks, civilian victims, we're not even talking about the military, the civilian victims who were mostly Kurdish people, because I'm also half Kurdish, so I spent a lot of time in Kurdistan with people who were attacked with Saddam. Before he attacked his own Kurds at Halabja, he experimented with the Iranians. And they get a grading. They get a grading of how shubiyai, how chemical you are. Top grading is 70%. So that is about how, because, sometimes these weapons don't kill you. Often they actually don't kill you. They just make you very, very ill for the rest of your life. So it also costs a lot of money, in terms of public health. Now, depending on your grading, depends on, again, do you have access to good universities, jobs, this kind of thing. And that, I found that really difficult. We would go to villages in Kurdistan where people were practically mobbing the state officials who were taking us around because they were saying, look at my burns, look at this, it's not fair, I don't have a grading. And then it was controversial. This person didn't really get burnt in the war, but he got burnt last year. So it's made it very complicated.
That's extraordinary, really, isn't it? Because it puts such a premium on not just martyrdom, but like semi-martyrdom, victimhood. And I can't help thinking a society that values victimhood gets into problems.
Shia Islam, Iran is a Shia country. It's the one major Islamic country that is majority Shia. Shia Islam is all about martyrdom. It's all about victimhood, to the point that the Shia, having always been this kind of hidden sect, really, very persecuted, the Shia within the religion are actually allowed to pretend that they're not Shia. And that's okay, because that is the history of Shia Islam.
You had to hide it to survive.
Yeah. It comes out of being a minority that's been persecuted.
Yeah.
So you can see, in a way, how that
feeds into the same thing. And what does that do to politics? in 25 words or less.
Well, it makes it as complicated as you can see. Iranian politics is,
Yeah.
basically, I think, you know. But I think it's interesting to take all of those concepts as you have and bring them home,
Yeah.
Ruth, and see how it applies to what's going on here. Do you see parallels?
I think there are parallels and splits, aren't there? I suppose what I was thinking was, in a way, you don't get any points in this country for having had a son or a brother who's been stabbed on the street, do you? So, in that way, it's very different. I suppose the parallel was more that I was thinking, well, a society, obviously it's not a war, I've called this two wars, it's not a war in the sense of a conscious intention that this should happen. But if you don't have a plan to stop something happening, it's just the same as having a conscious intention to have the result is the same. So, I think if anybody wanted it not to be true that young kids killed each other on the streets, perhaps something would have happened. And I don't think there's a simple answer to that. There's a whole thing about education and employment and racism and the rest of it. But that the end result of that neglect is almost the same as if you sent them off to war. If your son's being killed, he's being killed by whoever he's being killed by. So, that's what I see as the parallel. I think, and in a way, the issue is perhaps that it isn't an overt political issue here. The Black Lives Matter campaign, I think, is terribly important. But that is very still marginal to mainstream politics. Nobody is picking that up and saying, we need to be doing something about this.
And I think, I don't know, the audience can tell us, but I think even those of us who live in London are quite disconnected from this, from what's going on. We're not necessarily aware of it, as you say. It's not on the front pages, and it doesn't really touch us.
I notice it, if, God forbid, it happens in Tottenham, where I live, then I notice it more than it happens in Stockwell, where Tammy lives. That is appalling, but it's a reality. One is very provincial, narrow about these things. And if it happens outside of London, then it's further from the centre of my consciousness. There's nothing that makes it impinge on my consciousness unless I choose to let it.
Those riots that spilled out into the West End and stuff some years ago, they started in Tottenham, didn't they?
They started in Tottenham because a young man who was known to the police was seen driving along the main road in Tottenham. He was stopped by the police, and stories vary about whether or not he was armed. His friend who was in the car with him said he had a gun and he threw it away before the police shot him. That's not what the police say. But the riot started actually not simply because of that, but because his family only found out that he'd been shot because it was in the news. So the police had known for hours who it was that they'd shot, and they didn't inform the family. And so the family, with some local activists, went to the police station and said, we want you to come and tell us what's happened. And the police stayed inside the police station for several hours, by which point inevitably a crowd had gathered, and the family didn't want riots, they just wanted somebody to come and say this is what has happened. And the police handled it, one has to say, extremely badly, and that turned into a riot.
There's an interesting parallel there in what happens when people disappear sometimes in Iran, where the families end up having to go and stand for hours outside prisons to find out if
So somebody is arrested at home or picked up in the street or what? Any of those?
Any of those.
Yeah, and then you don't know until they're not come home.
And then I suppose you have to go and find out by doing this kind of thing.
Yeah. But it doesn't turn into riots,
No, because
too dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're more efficient at stopping that kind of.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about why you chose this form. Talk about your poetry a little bit, because I know you told me that you've been writing poetry for over 30 years, that you have 7 previous books of poetry. The latest was published last year. It's called Downpour. You've also got a novel. So when you were inspired to write this poem, why did you choose this particular form? Maybe you'd like to tell the audience a little bit more about it.
Right. This is, I'm pushing it, calling it Rubaiyat really. For people who don't know, the Rubai is a classic Farsi verse form of 4-line quatrain, and it has other formal characteristics that I am deeply unaware of. But for people like me, we know it first from the 19th century translation or version of some of the Rubaiyat of Khayyam, which was done by a poet called Edward Fitzgerald. And the last stanza that I read, the last stanza of the poem, I filched because it's the first stanza of Fitzgerald's Rubaiyat. And that is simply a 4-line verse where lines 1, 2 and 4 rhyme, and the third line isn't rhyme. And it's in iambic pentameters, which is the classic English language verse form. So, at one level, we're going to write something about Iran, how nice to use the Rubai as a form. It was also because of a story which I think you know. The last day we were in Tehran, and there was a second-hand bookstall set up by the road. So, of course, what do? You rush over to the second-hand bookstall until you realise you can't read any of the books. But the book dealer heard us talking and said, I've got to put it in English. And it was, I think, probably privately published verse, Rubaiyat, by, shamefully, I can't remember his name, a former diplomat of the Shah's regime who had, for whatever reason, fallen out of favour and retired to Shiraz to write verse. That's what does. And because he clearly had connections all over the world, he'd got it translated into English, French, German and Japanese, I think. So the volume had all of the verse in Farsi and then the translations. And so I'd come back with that, and the translator had done the kind of Fitzgerald type Rubai form. So that was kind of in my head, and I went back and read the Khayyam, Fitzgerald's Khayyam. And it just felt like a really easy form to use for this. There's something about, it's very insistent because you have the 3 rhymes in each stanza. It's very insistent, it kind of hammers what you're saying. And this, you will have realised, is not a subtle poem, it hammers its point somewhat. And although I think in the original that, a single verse is a poem rather than being part of a long narrative, I found that they kind of flowed quite nicely from one to the next after a while. And so it felt like an interesting thing to do. I'd never written in this form before, but then I don't normally write this kind of poems.
How are we doing for time?
You can continue for another 15-20 minutes and then we can have a Q&A.
Okay, yeah. Great. So let's lighten it up a bit. Tell the audience who won't have been to Iran what your impressions were other than the martyrs.
Oh, wow. I only got 15 minutes. I was blown away. My first impression was, how little I knew of the history and the culture. This isn't news really, but our education system basically assumes that history ends somewhere around Nice, I think, or possibly Rome, that doesn't go any further south or east. So I knew nothing in terms of history, and I was having to learn. On our first full day, we went to Persepolis, and this was the palace, the series of palaces, dating from what?
500 BC.
500 BC, thank you. So 2,500 years old, and these amazing carvings, these stunning, detailed carvings, a whole lot of figures of vassal leaders bringing tribute to the king. So they're bringing camels and leopards and gold and
You
land.
can see the different races and
Yeah.
nationalities. They're
Yes,
really
yeah, absolutely different features,
Yeah.
different hair, different.
costumes.
Yeah. And I thought, what were we doing here in 500 BC? Nothing quite as sophisticated as that. So there's something about history there. And I became a complete tile addict. I went round with my camera focused on tiles absolutely everywhere because they were so stunningly beautiful.
They're extraordinary, aren't they?
Absolutely, and the different, some of the later ones, the sort of 18th, 19th century picture tiles, but even more these domes and alcoves covered in tiles, which I assume are, in a way, an aid to meditation, because you stare into this pattern that
They just go on and on and on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sacred geometry, I think,
Yes,
isn't it? You
yes.
can really see that.
Yeah.
Repetition. And you've actually, I mean, you said that you couldn't write about this, but actually I think in your poem, actually, you really sum up this, that beautiful architecture, those aspects of Iran really succinctly as well.
Good.
Tiled domes and the alcoves, this beautiful.
This, and not just the tiles, but the architecture. I think we started in Shiraz, and we went to the Narendra Palace, which has a pavilion here and a pavilion there, and a beautiful garden between with bitter orange trees on. So you walk through the scent of the trees, exquisite plantings, and then of course a watercourse down the middle. And the regent, whoever he was, did his formal work in Pavilion 1 here, and then lived in Pavilion 2 over there. And I thought, nice work if you can get it, really. I mean, everybody ought to be able to live like that. There's something about the elegance and sophistication of that, and the sense of how, what is necessary to life in a town city surrounded by desert.
Yes, and the sensuality.
Yes,
Actually, I think that's something that people don't, because everyone one knows about Iran now so much because of the revolution and the Islam. The focus is on the Islamic culture. We forget that. Well, first of all, and this was even news to me when I was writing my book many years ago, that Iran is the longest, oldest inhabited piece of land by a single race in the world. So it's really ancient. And it's ancient in the sense that, that the Iranian race has been there for a really, really, really long time. So it's an extraordinarily refined culture because it's gone on, we've had lots of invasions, but we Persianized our invaders, not really the other way around. So there's this very strong sort of streak. And so before Islam came along, which was only in the 6th century, we had 2,000 years of being sort of Zoroastrian. That's very strong. It's much longer than Islam has been around. And so the sensuality, and even the sensuality even through Islam, is something that, you get it in the Omar Khayyam, especially Fitzgerald's version of it, so strongly, and we don't think of that. And I think you see it, don't you, when you're, especially in somewhere like Shiraz, which is the city of poets, I think you must know that, right? You went to Hafez and Saadi, and
I have to tell people about the Tomb of Hafez for anybody who hasn't been. Everybody goes to see the Tomb of Hafez, and the thing for a poet that was completely enchanting was that just outside there are these guys with little birds, budgerigars, and you give them some piddling amount of money, and the budgerigar picks a piece of paper out of a box, and the piece of paper has, of course, a verse of Hafez on it. This is immortality for poets, really.
and it's your fortune.
Yes,
It's
absolutely.
Hafez.
Yes.
You go with a question in your heart, and it's answered for you by Hafez. I mean, in fact, you can also just open the book of Hafez, and in any moment that you have a question or have some difficulty in your life, you just open Hafez and whatever that verse says is apt.
Yes.
And invariably it seems to be.
In this country it was done with the Bible, which didn't have quite the same feel to it, I think. Yeah.
And Shiraz is famous for its nightingales, its orange blossom, as you said. You're meant to be driven wild in the spring. In fact, were you there in the spring?
Yeah.
And was the orange blossom out? Yeah. Yeah, and apparently the scent drives you crazy.
Yeah.
So you have to sort of write poetry in order to deal with the craziness.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what she
And
was.
you're right about the centrality. It was really interesting. And of course, here we hear about not having any images of people in Islam and so on. We went to Isfahan, to that wonderful palace called, not on the square, outside. Yes. And there are these frescoes which are love scenes, which are exquisite.
Quite naughty, some of them.
Very naughty, some of them.
Quite crazy,
Yeah. And you think, well, people have had different interpretations of this over time.
Absolutely, and they've been restored now. I remember some years ago, quite soon after after the revolution, there was some fervour and things like the faces of the women were carved out, but they've all been restored back. And just to let everybody know as well, what the passion of the Iranians for their country, as opposed to the religion, is that, of course, Persepolis, as you said, it's very ancient, and that the Persian Empire predates Islam by centuries. And there's a story that a particularly powerful mullah after the revolution went to Persepolis with a sort of an army to try and knock it down, because they wanted to erase any pre-Islamic sort of traces from Iran, and Persepolis was defended by the local people, who turned up with sort of sticks and stuff and just wouldn't hear of it. And these might have been the same people that had been revolutionaries, the day before. So I think it's really important to understand that Iran is Islamic, but it's something much more than that.
The other thing I want to say, which was the frustration of our trip, was not being able to meet people easily. Because we had to have a minder. Our minder was a joy, and we spent a lot of time with her, and she was fun. She had her own views about the regime, which she was very clear about. But if we'd wanted to visit people, we would have had to hand over their names at the time when we applied for a visa. And absolutely ridiculous. I had actually tried, because there was a tour of Iranian women poets the year before in London, and I'd contacted the Poetry Society and British Council to try and see if I could make any contacts. I got nowhere. And so we didn't have any contacts. And so actually one of the things I wanted was to be able to talk to people more. Of course, people came up to us. They heard us speak English in the street. If they spoke English, they came and talked to us. Plus, there was this delightful thing which happened everywhere, many in the bazaars, where women would come up to our guide and mutter something to her, and she says, can she have her photo taken with you? So there are photos all over Iran of two elderly British and American women with somebody who doesn't know who they are. I like this idea of the sort of trophy. And it felt very nice, in fact. We never said no to it because it just felt delightful. And also, it's the reversal of the tourists taking photos of the natives. The natives take photos of the tourists. Seems much better, really.
That's lovely. It's a shame that there isn't more contact, more bridge building between, and in fact, I thought the British Council really was about doing that. So it's.
Well, I probably never got to speak to the right person, but and that would be what I would want to do for a return visit.
Yeah, if we can, maybe we should look into this really.
Okay.
Build some cultural bridges, between, as you say, poets and writers, because we've all got I think, what we've realised when we've talked about it a lot is we've got a lot more in common really with each other than we have that keeps us apart.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So human to human contact is always.
Yeah, that's what you want. I mean, looking at architecture is fabulous, but it's necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
I'd like to say one more thing about the book before we open up for questions, which is about the artwork here. And if you had a chance to look at it, even if you just had a chance to look at the cover, you'll see these are by Shahan Karimi, who we haven't met. He's the person who's his agent in London. When we were looking for an artist whose work we could use in the book, suggested him amongst others, and we immediately said this is exactly what we want. It's tremendously powerful stuff. You will see if you look at the book, even if you look at the cover. Look at the cover. I've got a whole. I don't know how to do this.
It's over there. Your copies are ready.
These are very much about martyrdom and the deaths in the war as well. And I think they're absolutely exquisite. I am so thrilled to have this book made beautiful by his artwork.
They're absolutely stunning, and they're not just sort of objects of beauty in their own right. They do reflect all of the themes as well. And it is interesting that, you know, all of these years after the end of the war, I mean, I went to an exhibition at Somerset House a couple of years ago. I think it was young new photographers from Iran. And almost, even though most of them have been either very young during the war or born since, in almost every case, the themes reflected something to do with the war, martyrdom, all of that kind of thing. So these are things that still continue to resonate. Should we see if there's any questions?
You may have answered this already, and I may not have heard it, but did you? I mean, I was curious about that throwaway comment about photographs, about you being all over Iran. But did you get a sense of what the purpose was? And that's addressed to both of you, really, about what function it fulfilled for people.
The pictures
The
of
pictures
artists.
of you and your
Oh.
with a person you didn't know.
I think my guess was that they didn't see too many tourists. And also there were only two of us, you see. There were groups of tourists going around, but it would take a bit more courage to go up on with the tourists to try and get the photo taken. So I think we were possibly more approachable. And we were a bit of a rare commodity, really, in the bazaars and, you know, around the more ordinary, less touristy bits of the cities. You know, I would like to think it meant more, but who knows? Do you have an idea about that, Carmen?
I think it's exactly what you said. I think people are really friendly in Iran, and they really want to reach out, and they're very thrilled when foreigners, particularly Westerners, come to visit, because I think there's a big feeling in Iran that, you know, it's very misunderstood. A lot of people want to practice their English. And it's an extraordinarily hospitable culture also. So I think probably a lot of that is exactly as Ruth says, it's just about the novelty and about going, oh, this is really exciting. So it's sort of like seeing a celebrity. You know.
But it's also a non-verbal way of expressing some of the cultures you were talking about too, because it's actually going up and saying hello, welcome to our country, and well, how great to see you here, hope you like it, all of that stuff. Really,
yes, I think absolutely. And you know, what I always hear from Western, sort of non-Iranian friends who go to Iran is, without exception, how, for all of the beauty and all of the very impressive things about Iran, the first thing they always comment on is how friendly people were and how hospitable they were. And there is this frustration that Ruth has expressed, which is that you can't quite get outside of the government restrictions always, but you know, hopefully this is something that will be possible on future trips, you know, if we can make some of those.
So if somebody said come and have tea, you couldn't, that would be prevented.
We people did occasionally. Our guide had to report back to security every day on what we'd done. She said, I said, what do you say? She said, every day I followed itinerary and send it off. But we couldn't, she wasn't allowed to leave us alone except in the hotel. That was partly because of me, but more because of my friend who has an American passport, and obviously, any American is about to destroy the regime. And we said to her the first day, oh, come on, you can leave us, we won't tell. And she said, no, but the hotel staff will. So we couldn't risk her livelihood by doing that.
I think that's what it becomes about, because it's become, particularly in the last years, actually, much more of this kind of watched thing. Because you used to be able to go independently much more easily. I still have friends who do go independently. I think they get everything sorted out with a tour group and then sort of just do their own thing once they're there. But you run the risk a little bit of compromising whoever it is that has extended the hospitality. In my position, weirdly, I have a lot of other journalists and people approaching me for contacts in Iran. It's very anti-intuitive. I say no. Because you don't want to get anyone into trouble. That's the sad thing.
When we came back, we had an email from our guide who had taken a British couple out shortly after us. And she'd emailed us, actually when they were there, asking for an interpretation of something they'd said, just how rude was it. So we tried to smooth it over somewhat, because she had to live with these people for another week. And at the end of it, she said that they had gone off on their own without telling her one day. And it was just incredibly selfish. Incredibly selfish. And clearly it was a serious risk to her.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because I think a lot, in our living as we do in such a lovely free society, we don't think about what stuff means and the complexities of it. And as you say, if you go off and you leave your guide behind, you are going to jeopardise her livelihood and possibly her security and safety. So Iran is complex. It's complex.
I was wondering how much music you may have been exposed to there. Whether a lot of Western music, you go around London, you can't escape, or in European cities or Americans, you can't escape music. I just wonder how much of it you were exposed to.
Well, we spent a lot of time in our guide's car, going from one place to another, because the distance was very long. And so we had lots of music in the car. There was one point when she wanted to play Adele, but we persuaded her to prefer Jamaican music. We had, I'm not sure what I should say about this really, given the conversation we just had, but some of the music that she was listening to is not, let us say, readily available in Iran, including female singers. I'm not allowed to listen to female singers, obviously.
Well, I don't know that you're not allowed to listen to them. They're not meant to perform to a mixed audience.
Right, yeah.
So
we'd have been out in the car with a female guide?
Yeah.
Okay.
You could have gone to a concert as well, if it was just you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Although, as with everything in Iran, that's the surface.
Yes.
Everything happens under the surface.
Yeah. Yes, well, we gathered that. Eventually, our guide said to us, don't think we live like this. We do have mixed parties. Of course, we take the hijab off as soon as we're indoors. Yes, we do. We went past vineyards. We said, "What vineyards?" And she said, "Yeah, wine. Shiraz is famous for wine."
Shiraz. Yeah, that's. Iran is very much what the law is, and then what happens. So, as a tourist, it depends on whether you are able, and that will be to do with sort of how friendly your guide is, and maybe how many other contacts, So it can be hard to get away from the surface of it, But if you're not on the, everything is there, just there. Go on.
Do you have a sense, Ruth, of where the Rubaiyat is at the moment in terms of poetic usage? Are there many contemporary, I mean, I know there aren't many contemporary Western poets using it, but are there many contemporary Iranian poets using it? Or is it considered rather old hat?
I don't know. Mimi might know.
Really?
Oh, sorry, what was the question?
We're just wondering if anyone is writing Rubaiyat these days.
Rubaiyat in English?
Yeah, well, in English or whether contemporary Iranian poets are using it.
I don't know about Iranian poets, but I know, for example, Marilyn Hacker, who's
Interesting.
an American poet who lives in Paris. She has recently been writing quite a few, I think. I don't know about Iranian poets. I don't think Iranian poets who write in English are writing in the traditional forms.
That's interesting. So maybe it's going to make a comeback.
Why is it
It will start a trend.
Why would it be necessarily out of favour then? I mean, just the way things go with some styles, I guess.
Who knows? I mean, I assume that when you're 25 and writing poetry, you want to write exactly the opposite of what everybody in the previous generation has written. So if the previous generation were writing Rubaiyat, you wouldn't, and conversely. That's a simplistic answer, but that's how it tends to work, really. You have to reinvent.